What happens when a Supreme Court justice gets treated like a suspect on a back road in Alabama? Clarence Wilton wasn't in a hurry. At 72, the Alabama sun didn't move any faster just because you did. He kept his left hand at the top of the wheel, tapping lightly, driving south on Route 43 outside of Demopolis. The road was mostly empty, just fields, pine trees, and the occasional pickup parked off in the brush. His Lincoln, a 1998 town car that used to be his late wife Hattie's favorite, still ran smooth. Cream-colored exterior, burgundy interior, smelled faintly of old cologne and leather polish. Clarence had just left his sister Bernice's house. She had made chicken and lima beans, then insisted he take 2 containers home. He'd tucked them under a towel on the passenger seat so they wouldn't slide. He was still in his Sunday clothes, even though it was Tuesday. Slacks, a crisp button-up, and a jacket folded neatly on the back seat. That was Clarence. Always polished, always prepared. Old habits from a life spent in the courtroom. First as a public defender, then a judge, and now, after much persuasion from the president himself, a newly appointed associate justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. But Clarence didn't see himself that way. Not really. He still shopped at the Piggly Wiggly, still read the paper, not the news online, still liked his tea sweet and his answers slow. The court title felt like a borrowed coat, fine to wear, but not something you'd brag about, especially not back home. He glanced in the rearview mirror. Nothing behind him, just the long 2-lane stretch and the late afternoon glare coming in from the west. Clarence reached over and turned the radio knob gently, gospel on low, barely above the hum of the engine. Mahalia Jackson, he thought. That woman could always calm his nerves. And that's when he saw it. Flashing lights in the rear view, blue and white, pulsing fast. He squinted. Was it for him? He was going 43 in a 45. No sudden turns, no swerving. Everything was clean. Registration, insurance, tags, all up to date. He even had his state-issued Supreme Court ID in his wallet, along with a veteran's card from his brief time in the Army back in '73. Clarence gently pulled onto the gravel shoulder and came to a full stop. He put the car in park, turned the radio down, and waited. His heart rate didn't change. This had happened before, more than once. A black man in a nice car was always a magnet in the South. He kept both hands on the wheel, fingers spread wide. The side mirror showed a young officer getting out of the cruiser. Tall, white, stocky build, no partner. The man adjusted his belt as he approached, one hand already resting near his holster. Clarence didn't blink, didn't flinch. He just waited. The officer leaned down, not smiling. "License and registration," he barked. "Not even a good afternoon." Clarence nodded slowly. "Of course, officer. My name is Clarence Wilton. I'm reaching—" "I said license and registration, now." Clarence froze mid-motion. The tone wasn't unfamiliar, but it was unnecessary. He looked the officer in the eyes, calm but alert. "It's in my wallet, which is in my inside pocket. I'll move slow." The officer's jaw clenched. "You do that." Clarence reached with 2 fingers and slowly retrieved his wallet. He handed over his license and the blue and gold Supreme Court ID. The officer barely glanced at them before tossing the ID onto the dashboard. "What is this?" he muttered. "That's a federal identification card. I'm an associate—" "Step out of the vehicle," the officer interrupted. "But officer, I said out, now." Clarence hesitated, but hesitation would only make things worse. Clarence opened the door carefully, his joints groaning as he stepped out onto the gravel. The heat pressed down on his shoulders. He was tall but lean, moving with the kind of grace that comes from years of discipline, not gym routines. Officer Brian Cutler took a step back, hands still hovering near his weapon. He gave Clarence a once-over, eyes squinting behind cheap sunglasses. 29 years old, fresh out of some training academy in Mobile, itching for action in a place where things didn't happen often. His badge read C.B. Cutler. His voice was clipped, sharp, like he was late for something. "Turn around and put your hands on the hood." Clarence turned slowly. "Officer, I assure you there's no threat here. I've done nothing wrong. If you take a moment to—" "You hard of hearing?" Clarence stiffened, but didn't speak. He placed his palms gently on the hot metal of the Lincoln's hood. The heat stung, but he didn't flinch. Cutler came around behind him, kicked Clarence's legs apart with more force than necessary, then started patting him down. "Any weapons on you?" "No, sir." "Drugs? Anything I need to know about?" Only thing on me is a roll of mints and a pack of tissues. Cutler snorted. Smart mouth. Clarence said nothing. The younger man found the tissues and mints in Clarence's jacket pocket and tossed them into the gravel like trash. Then he yanked open the driver's side door and started rummaging through the car without permission. Hey, Clarence turned slightly. You don't have a warrant. There's no probable cause. What you're doing right now is illegal. Cutler turned, face red. Let me tell you something, old man. Around here, I decide what's legal. You want to teach me the law, save it for court. Clarence's voice didn't rise. I've spent 45 years teaching the law. In fact, I've ruled on more cases than you've had hot dinners. You should take a moment and look again at that ID you threw aside. Cutler stepped toward him. Close, too close. You think you're somebody, huh? That's supposed to scare me? No, Clarence said quietly. It's supposed to remind you that respect doesn't come with a badge. It comes with behavior. There was a flicker, just for a moment. Something crossed Cutler's face, doubt maybe or confusion, but it passed quick. He stepped back, snatched up the Supreme Court ID from the dashboard, held it like it was fake. What is this? You print this at the Kinko's in Tuscaloosa? Clarence shook his head slightly. My name is Clarence Wilton. I was sworn in 3 months ago in Washington, D.C., by Chief Justice Landon himself. It's all public record. You can verify it with a single call. Cutler didn't call. Instead, he muttered into his shoulder mic, asking dispatch for a check on the license and tags. Then he circled the car again, like he was still expecting to find a kilo of something stuffed under a seat. The gospel CD skipped once, still playing soft in the background. A slow line of sweat ran down Clarence's back. The heat wasn't what bothered him. It was the silence. The kind that stretched. The kind that made room for mistakes. Why are you even out here? Cutler asked. You don't look local. Clarence let out a breath. I was visiting my sister. I lived 2 counties over, born in Mobile, went to school in Montgomery, practiced law in Selma for 20 years. That local enough for you? Cutler ignored the answer. He leaned back against his cruiser, arms crossed. You're awfully calm. Most people in your spot would be a little more concerned. Clarence looked at him. That's the difference between fear and experience. Cutler stared like he was trying to make sense of the man in front of him. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, a second vehicle pulled up, dark green with a gold star painted on the door. Sheriff's deputy, middle-aged, Hispanic, slight paunch, boots coated in red clay. He stepped out slow, hand shading his eyes. Everything all right here? The deputy asked, walking toward them. Cutler straightened up. Just a routine stop. Suspect had trouble complying. The deputy looked past him. His eyes landed on Clarence, and his whole face changed. Judge Wilton? He asked, stunned. Clarence gave a slow nod. Afternoon, Deputy Morales. But now, the silence didn't just hang, it cracked. Deputy Morales' pace slowed as he approached, confusion written clear across his face. Judge Wilton, he repeated, like the words tasted strange coming out. I saw your confirmation on C-SPAN. You were in D.C. just last month. Clarence gave a polite nod, arms still resting on the hood. That's correct. I've only just returned to Alabama for the week. My sister's been sick. Morales turned to Cutler, who suddenly looked smaller under the weight of someone else's authority. You didn't recognize him? Cutler shrugged stiffly. Didn't have to. He wasn't complying. No badge, no uniform, no reason for special treatment. Morales' jaw worked a moment. He stepped past Cutler and gently put a hand on Clarence's arm. Sir, I'm sorry. You don't need to stay like that. Please, go ahead and stand upright. Clarence pushed off the hood with effort. His back was sore now. His knees ached, but he moved slowly, with dignity, brushing off his slacks even though there was no dust. Thank you, Deputy. Morales turned again, voice low but firm. What exactly did you stop him for? He was driving slow, Cutler said defensively. Below the limit, acting suspicious. Suspicious how? Cutler's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Clarence spoke up. He never told me a reason, Deputy. Just yanked me out the car, rifled through my things, and mocked my identification. Cutler's face reddened. I was doing my job. No, Morales said flatly. You were doing what you think the job is. Cutler's hand twitched. Are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm saying it plain. Morales turned to Clarence again. Sir, is there anything missing or damaged in your vehicle? Clarence shook his head. No, but I'd like a record made of this stop, including what your colleague said and how he handled my identification. You got it, Morales replied, but Cutler stepped forward. Wait a second. He didn't tell me he was a judge until after I asked him to step out. Clarence didn't raise his voice. That's because you didn't ask anything. You ordered. There's a difference. Morales gave Cutler a look that made the younger man shift on his feet. You ever stop and wonder why you feel threatened by a 72-year-old man in dress slacks and glasses? Cutler didn't answer. He just glanced toward his cruiser, as if hoping backup might arrive to bail him out of the hole he'd dug. Morales sighed, pulled out his phone. I'm calling the sheriff directly. He'll want to know about this. You're throwing me under the bus? Cutler snapped. No, Morales said calmly. You climbed under it yourself. Clarence leaned on the side of his Lincoln, taking slow breaths. His hands were trembling now, but he kept them folded, hidden from sight. He didn't want to show what the last 10 minutes had done to him. The thing was, he'd been through worse. He remembered walking through back doors as a young attorney in Selma, remembered defending men who'd been beaten and broken by deputies who wore the same uniforms Morales and Cutler wore now. He thought he had lived long enough to see things change, but now he wasn't so sure. You all right, Judge? Morales asked, noticing the silence. Clarence nodded slowly. I'm all right, just tired. Cutler finally spoke again, voice sharp. So what now? I get written up for not knowing who someone is? Morales looked at him hard. No, you get written up for forgetting what your badge is supposed to stand for. Clarence looked at both men. He didn't want revenge. He didn't want headlines. He wanted understanding, but he knew better than to expect that from everyone. Cutler mumbled something under his breath and walked back to his cruiser, slamming the door. Morales stayed behind. I'll make sure this gets documented, sir. I'm truly sorry. Clarence didn't smile. It's not your fault, but it is your problem. All of ours, really. He climbed back into his car, turned the key, and let the engine settle back into its steady hum. But something in him had changed, because this wasn't just about him anymore. Clarence didn't drive off right away. He sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel, watching Deputy Morales speak into his radio. The deputy wasn't in a hurry. He paced slow circles in the gravel, using measured words, explaining what had happened like someone who understood the weight of it. Through the windshield, Clarence could see Cutler still in his cruiser, staring straight ahead, lips tight, probably stewing in a mess of pride and confusion. Clarence had seen that look 1,000 times in court. Young men too proud to admit when they'd gone too far, too afraid to back up and say, I was wrong. He reached for the water bottle in the side compartment, took a sip. The cool hit the back of his throat, but it didn't clear the ache sitting in his chest. 10 minutes passed before Morales approached the Lincoln again. He leaned slightly into the window. Sir, the sheriff's on his way. He asked me to tell you he'd like to speak with you personally. Says he knows you from your days in Selma. Clarence nodded, his voice soft. That would be Sheriff Givens. Morales smiled faintly. Yes, sir. He said you once scared the hell out of him during a deposition in '96. Clarence chuckled. He showed up late and never read the file. I made an example of him. Well, he remembers. He's coming now. Clarence gave a slight nod and turned off the engine. I'll wait. As the sun dipped lower, a few cars passed slowly, drivers craning their necks to see what was going on. Nobody stopped, just curiosity in motion. Clarence sat still, gazing at the side mirror, the dirt road, the tall grass, the sound of cicadas building in the distance. It should have felt familiar, maybe even comforting. But it didn't. It felt different now. 10 minutes later, a black SUV rolled up with sheriff markings and a silver grill guard. The door opened and out stepped Sheriff Howard Givens, a tall, heavy-set man in his 60s. Gray stubble lined his cheeks, a man with a reputation for running his department like a business and his courtroom visits like reunions. He walked straight to the driver's side, no hesitation. Clarence stepped out to meet him. Judge Wilton, Givens said, shaking his hand firmly. Damn shame this is how we see each other again. Not your doing, Clarence replied. No, but it's on my watch, and that matters. Givens turned and glanced toward Cutler's cruiser. I've already spoken to Deputy Morales, heard the whole thing. Body cam confirms it too. Doesn't surprise me. Listen, Givens said, lowering his voice. That kid's got more bark than brains. Grew up in Foley, barely passed background. I knew he was going to be a handful, but I didn't think it would come to this." Clarence looked him in the eyes. "And now that it has, I'm taking him off the street. He'll be suspended pending review, and we'll be reaching out to your office formally." Clarence didn't nod. He didn't blink. What's he learning from that? That he pushed too far, or that he picked the wrong target? Givens sighed. Maybe both. "You and I both know," Clarence said, voice even, "if I were just Clarence from down the road, and not Clarence Wilton with federal credentials, we wouldn't be standing here. You'd be fielding an entirely different kind of call." The sheriff didn't argue. He just stared down at the gravel and said, "You're right." But being right didn't fix the damage. It only named it. Clarence got home just after sunset. The sky was bruised orange, with streaks of pink fading into the pine trees behind his house. The porch light clicked on automatically, casting a soft glow on the brick steps he and Hattie had picked out together 30 years ago. He parked the Lincoln gently, like it might break, then sat in the driveway a moment, breathing. He was home, safe, technically untouched, but something inside him didn't feel whole. Not broken, just dented. Inside, the house was still. Cool air, soft carpet under his shoes, the smell of books and furniture polish. He dropped his keys in the bowl by the door, walked to the kitchen, and placed the Tupperware from Bernice on the counter. But he didn't eat. Instead, he walked into his study and sat down in the old leather chair Hattie used to tease him about, opened his laptop, logged in, and there it was. The incident had already hit local news. Retired judge and Supreme Court justice mistaken for suspect during traffic stop. The headline sounded sterile, but the video? The body cam footage had leaked fast. Cutler's voice, sharp, impatient. Clarence's calm replies. The way the ID had been tossed aside like junk mail. The moment Morales stepped in. It was all there. No edits. No room for misunderstanding. Clarence leaned back, closed his eyes, and listened to himself on screen. Heard how steady he sounded. How even his tone was. He hadn't planned on being composed. It was just who he was. But in that moment, hearing it out loud, he realized something. He had been performing, just like always. Because black men in America don't get to panic. They don't get to shout. Even at 72, even with a Supreme Court title stitched to their name, they have to stay calm to survive. His phone buzzed, a message from his law clerk in D.C. "Judge, we're getting press requests from CNN, MSNBC, and the Washington Post. What do you want us to say?" Clarence stared at the screen for a long time before replying, "Say I'm resting. Say I'm reflecting." He didn't need to do interviews. The footage spoke for itself. The country would argue about it all week. One half would say it was outrageous. The other would ask what he did to provoke it. That's how these things always went. Clarence had seen enough public discourse to know it rarely changed hearts. It only hardened opinions. Still, the calls came in. Emails from former clerks, messages from colleagues, a voicemail from the president's chief of staff offering support and solidarity. Clarence deleted it without listening to the end. He wasn't angry. He was exhausted. Around midnight, he opened his window and listened to the night sounds. Crickets, wind in the trees, the rustle of something moving in the brush. The same noises he'd heard as a boy in Alabama, walking home after dark with his books clutched to his chest because his mama said, "Keep your head down and your hands clean." That had never changed. He had become a judge, a Supreme Court justice, a symbol. And yet earlier that day, he'd still been treated like a suspect. Not because of what he did, but because of what he looked like. The doorbell rang at 12:14 a.m. He frowned. He walked to the door, checked the security camera, and saw something unexpected. A young black man, maybe early 20s, nervous, wearing a hoodie and jeans. He held up his phone with the body cam video paused on screen. Clarence opened the door slowly. "Can I help you?" The young man took a step back. "Sir, I just wanted to say thank you. My name's Raven. I saw the video. What you said to that cop. The way you handled it." He swallowed hard. "I just needed to see someone like you still exists." Clarence nodded gently, a tired but genuine smile forming on his face. "We still exist," he said softly, "but the fight ain't over." And just like that, something heavy lifted, because even in pain, there's purpose. By the next morning, the video had crossed 1 million views. News anchors dissected it frame by frame. Some called it a wake-up call. Others tried to explain it away. Protocol, miscommunication, an isolated incident. Clarence didn't watch those. He didn't need to. His email inbox ballooned with interview requests, panel invites, and conference keynotes. The university that once overlooked his application as a young man now wanted him to speak on bias and law enforcement. Clarence closed the laptop. He hadn't spoken publicly yet, not a single word since the footage surfaced. But that didn't stop others from speaking for him. One local pastor in Mobile shared a sermon titled, "Even Judges Get Judged." It went viral. A clip played on the national morning shows. If he isn't safe, none of us are. Young people marched, not in the thousands, but in the hundreds, enough to be noticed. They carried signs that read, "He stayed calm, they stayed armed." Respect isn't optional, and one that hit Clarence the hardest. "I want to grow old without fear." Meanwhile, Officer Cutler had been suspended with pay pending investigation. His lawyer appeared on cable news, defending his actions. "My client followed procedure. This is just a case of a man being upset he wasn't recognized." Clarence scoffed at that from his armchair. "Not being recognized isn't the problem," he muttered. "Being reduced is." That evening, Clarence finally agreed to speak, just once. No press, no studio lights, just a podium set up in the small Selma Community Center, where he'd held free legal clinics back in the 80s. Folding chairs lined the room. About 120 people filled them. Young, old, church hats and fitted caps, veterans and teenagers. Word had spread quickly. Clarence took the mic with no papers in his hands, no speech. He looked out at the crowd, paused, then said, "I didn't come here to talk about what happened to me. I came here to talk about what's been happening to us." The room hushed. "I've been pulled over before, many times. Sometimes they saw the suit and backed off. Sometimes they didn't. But I stayed calm, not because I wasn't scared, but because I knew I had to be." He looked around, locking eyes with a young boy sitting in the front row with his mother. "We teach our children that if they just behave, if they dress right, speak right, stay in line, they'll be safe. But that's a lie, and lies are dangerous. Because when the truth shows up, when that uniform still sees you as a threat, those kids don't know what to do." A soft murmur passed through the room. Clarence continued, voice low but steady. "The uniform doesn't see your resume. It doesn't see your service, your degrees, your family. It sees what it wants to see. And until we fix that lens, until officers like Cutler are trained and held accountable, it won't matter who's sitting on the Supreme Court bench or riding in the back of a bus." He ended with this: "I didn't come here to ask for pity. I came here to remind you that being quiet doesn't keep you safe. Speaking up might not either, but at least it keeps you free." The crowd stood, not cheering, not clapping wildly, just standing, united in a heavy, silent kind of respect. But even silence can carry power if you know how to hold it. A week later, Clarence returned to Washington. The marble halls of the Supreme Court felt colder now. The columns loomed taller, the floors shinier, but they didn't feel sacred, just heavy. He walked slowly through the main corridor, past portraits of justices who never would have been stopped on an Alabama road. Men whose names adorned textbooks and law schools, many of whom had never felt the weight of suspicion from a stranger with a badge. Inside his chambers, he found a handwritten letter waiting on his desk. No return address. The envelope was plain, sealed with a single strip of tape. Clarence opened it carefully. It read, "Dear Judge Wilton, I'm not black, I'm not a lawyer, I don't even know the law all that well, but I saw that video, and for the first time in my life, I understood something I never had to think about. I'm sorry it took seeing you to finally believe it. A father of 3 in Flagstaff, Arizona." Clarence folded the letter gently and placed it in his coat pocket. Not for show, just to keep it close. There wouldn't be a lawsuit, no press conference, no dramatic court ruling, but something had shifted. He could feel it. Not just in himself, but in the people watching. Back in Alabama, Ray Vaughn had started a blog with other young men in town. They called it No More Warnings. They shared stories, posted resources, and started holding small town hall meetings about policing. Deputy Morales was promoted to a training role where he began teaching de-escalation techniques to new recruits. As for Cutler, He resigned, quietly. No press, no public apology. But he was gone. That would have to be enough. Clarence sat behind his desk, staring out the window. Rain fell in a light mist over the Capitol dome. He thought of Hattie, of his mother, of the young man on his porch, phone in hand, looking for hope in a tired old judge. And he thought of all the people who'd never made it past that traffic stop. He reached for a pen and scribbled something in the corner of a notepad. 4 words. He didn't overthink them. Power means protecting the powerless. That's what he'd say the next time someone asked what justice was. Not a robe, not a gavel, not a courtroom. Justice was a man who could have stayed silent, but chose not to, because staying silent never changed a thing. If this story moved you, share it. Talk about it. Don't let the conversation end when the video does, because one day it won't be a Supreme Court justice in that car. It'll be someone you know, maybe even someone you love. Speak up, stay aware, and remember, the law only works if it works for everyone.